The corridors under Stonehenge weren't designed for anyone to wander into comfortably. Every twist and turn seemed calculated to unnerve you, walls pressing in close with rough stone that scraped at my elbows, and air so thick it seemed to slow my lungs. It was hard to tell if the damp, reeking smell clinging to every inch was a reminder of the earth above or something older, left behind by those who'd built this place. If they'd even been human. It was the kind of job I'd usually pass up. But when you're a respected archaeologist barely scraping by, you eventually find yourself agreeing to just about anything that'll pay the bills. Plus, Dr. Landry, my old mentor, had dangled some cryptic message about an unprecedented discovery. I figured he was being dramatic. Academics are like that when they want funding. But I've never been one to say no to a paycheck. So I followed Landry and the rest of his overeager team down through a maze of stones beneath the monument, listening to him drone on about the significance of it all. The air only grew thicker the deeper we went, like it didn't want us down here, and my mind began to wander, thinking about how many people had theorized over Stonehenge's purpose. Some said it was a celestial calendar, others claimed it was an ancient burial site or a spiritual ground. None of those theories explained this. A hidden chamber buried far below ground, riddled with markings and carvings that looked nothing like what we'd ever seen before. "Hey!" Landry called over his shoulder, his voice muffled as it bounced off the stone walls. "You coming? Or would you rather let us find the century's greatest discovery on our own?" "Keep talking like that, Landry, and I'm going to start charging by the minute," I muttered, forcing myself to follow. The others laughed nervously. They hadn't spent enough time down here yet to feel it. How the walls pressed in closer with every step. How each breath came just a bit harder. How the weight of thousands of years felt like it was poised just over your head, waiting to crush you if you even thought of taking another step. When we reached the main chamber, even Landry's voice faltered. The air tasted strange here, metallic somehow, and a low hum thrummed beneath my feet as if I was standing on the skin of something impossibly large, feeling its heartbeat. In the center of the room lay a large stone altar, or what I assumed was an altar, though it was cracked and half buried. What really caught my eye was the wall behind it. Carved into the stone was a mural so intricate, so jarringly clear, that it didn't belong down here. A map. And not just any map, a map of Earth. It was unmistakable, the shape of continents, oceans, even rough markings that seemed to indicate tectonic plates. But it was the perspective that stopped me cold. This wasn't Earth as ancient people might have imagined it. No, this was Earth as it looked from space. As I took it in, my stomach twisted, cold and tight. It was like staring into the eyes of something that shouldn't exist, something that forced me to confront just how small we were, how insignificant. "You seeing this?" I heard myself say, pointing to the carving. "This isn't possible." The team gathered around, Landry pushing past me to get a closer look. For once, he was silent. The others whispered amongst themselves, nervously throwing around words like anomaly and artifact. They hadn't caught on yet to what I was feeling, but I could see the doubt creeping into their faces. "I don't know who made this," Landry finally said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it, "but they had to have had knowledge we don't understand." No kidding. I took a step closer, squinting at smaller symbols etched beneath the map. They looked vaguely mathematical, a cryptic alignment of numbers and lines, all following some pattern that escaped my understanding. I reached out, tracing one line with my finger, feeling the grit of the stone bite into my skin. "Don't touch anything, David," one of the younger researchers said, pulling at my sleeve. "We don't know if it's safe." But I ignored him, moving closer to one set of symbols. They didn't look like the rest, more geometric, like coordinates or some strange form of alien mathematics. My pulse raced as a thought struck me, a terrifying, undeniable realization. These symbols, they were directions, a set of coordinates. "Someone had to have put these here," I murmured. "They're not decoration. They're pointing us somewhere." Landry nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the mural. That's exactly what I was thinking. He looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. And not the sort of fear you feel when you're in danger. This was something more primal, more existential. Do we have any idea where they lead? Landry didn't answer at first, his gaze drifting back to the mural. I've had a team running calculations since we found this place. We're looking at somewhere in the Amazon, deep in the jungle, too deep for any ordinary expedition. The word Amazon echoed through my head, but it was the silent, suppressed horror in his voice that held me. He didn't have to say it for me to know. We weren't dealing with the work of some lost human civilization here. This went beyond anything humanity could have achieved in the past, and maybe even now. One of the researchers, a kid barely out of grad school, muttered, "But who put it here?" No one answered. As ridiculous as it sounded, standing in that chamber beneath tons of stone and dirt, staring at a map of our planet from above, I knew exactly what we all were thinking. That maybe we weren't alone, and that whoever or whatever had created this place had left behind more than a few marks on Earth. Landry's voice brought me back to the moment. "We're looking at a specific location, somewhere in the Amazon basin," he said, not taking his eyes off the carvings. The team exchanged glances, each of us turning over the same uncomfortable thought. It was beginning to feel like the first step into a labyrinth where every choice had consequences we weren't prepared for, and whatever was hidden out there in the Amazon, it wasn't meant to be stumbled upon casually. "We'll need specialists," I said, breaking the silence. "Equipment, satellite mapping, and a good deal of funding. That area's dense and brutal. Not to mention we'll need a plausible excuse for going there if we're spotted." Landry nodded, his eyes still dark with something akin to dread. "This isn't the sort of place you send a team into unprepared. I'll start lining up the approvals and the funding. We can only hope they come through without questions." Silence stretched as we all stared at the stone map again. This place wasn't ours, and whatever we were planning felt like prying into something we'd never understand. But the coordinates were there, taunting us. Whoever or whatever carved them had left a breadcrumb trail. The flight was longer than I'd expected, from the quiet English countryside to a humid corner of the Amazon basin. The real work hadn't even started, but the unease I'd felt in that underground chamber at Stonehenge lingered, coiled tight in the back of my mind. Landry's face had taken on a hollow look by the time we touched down at the nearest accessible airstrip, like he'd spent the whole flight wrestling with something he couldn't let go of. Or wouldn't. The team we'd joined on site was small, maybe 6 or 7 people, each with the look of someone who'd spent years off the grid. Private researchers and local guides, brought in by Landry's mysterious corporate backer. The corporation hadn't sent any representatives, which should have been a relief. Instead, it made the whole setup feel like we were being watched by ghosts. The trees pressed in close, dense walls of green and black that seemed to absorb the sun, letting nothing out. There was a heaviness in the air that felt like a warning, thick and stifling. The forest didn't want us here. You could feel it. A silent, waiting hostility. We trekked for hours until, just before nightfall, we reached the coordinates. There was no mistaking it. Amidst the tangled roots and stifling humidity stood a stone structure, half sunken into the earth, almost swallowed by time. "Looks like we found it," I muttered, half to myself, as I took in the stonework. Landry gave a curt nod. "Not a lot of people get a chance to see something like this. Let's get the scanners ready, document everything we can before we make contact." The team set up the equipment, high-frequency scanners, portable lights, and a satellite-linked feed to record everything in case things went south. I took it all in with a detached sort of interest, as if preparing for a storm I knew was coming but didn't know how to brace for. The interior walls bore symbols far more complex than anything at Stonehenge. Sprawling patterns that looked like star maps, spirals reaching across the walls and ceiling. They glowed under the beams of our flashlights, creating the eerie effect of movement, as if the stars themselves were crawling around us. "Anyone else feel that?" whispered one of the team, a younger researcher named Jonah. "It's like the air's charged," I replied, swallowing the dryness in my throat. Jonah shivered, muttering something as we moved deeper inside. The walls of the narrow corridor seemed to lean in, each twist and turn drawing us further down into an open chamber where the ceiling rose high above, its stonework dark and glistening. In the center of the room, embedded into the stone floor, lay the object of our search, a machine, or something close to one. Its edges fused with the rock, it seemed remarkably advanced, with an intricate array of symbols and dials unlike anything I'd seen in my life. I moved closer, almost afraid to breathe. Every inch of it seemed alien and incomprehensible, yet unmistakably intentional, like it was here for a reason, waiting. Landry broke the silence. "It's a signal. Look at these symbols. They correspond with constellations, but the alignments don't match anything from Earth's skies. We're looking at coordinates from beyond." "Beyond?" I repeated, the word thick and absurd in my mouth. "Beyond what? Beyond our solar system?" "More than that," he murmured, kneeling by the machine, eyes wide. "If I'm right, this thing is pointing us somewhere beyond our galaxy." This machine, embedded here for God knows how long, was still transmitting, still active, as though it hadn't aged a day. We worked in silence, setting up the scanning equipment to capture the data, taking samples from the rock around the machine, logging every angle of it. I felt the machine's pulse grow stronger, vibrating underfoot, an unnerving reminder of its power, of its alien presence in this place. Hours passed, but no one seemed to notice. Time lost its meaning in that chamber, the outside world fading as we became absorbed in our work, unraveling piece after piece of this puzzle. The machine's drone intensified, the pulse rising from the floor and pressing into my chest. A rhythmic vibration filled the room, each beat sending ripples through the air that seemed to grip us, hold us in place. It was like standing in front of a giant's heartbeat, feeling it throb against your ribs, pressing down on your lungs. "What's going on?" someone asked, but their voice sounded distant, almost swallowed by the machine's resonance. "It's responding to us," Landry said, his voice almost drowned out by the vibration. "It knows we're here." The machine emitted a single low-frequency sound, a deep note that bypassed the ears entirely, going straight to the bones. Every nerve in my body felt like it was on fire, my skin prickling with an invisible charge. I wanted to move, to get out, but my legs refused to cooperate. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to do something, but my body was frozen, locked in place as the machine's drone intensified. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. Landry stumbled back, visibly shaken. "We need to get this data analyzed immediately. If we're right, this isn't a transmission, it's a beacon." A beacon. Something reaching out, calling across the cosmos. And we had just awakened it, stirred something ancient and unknown into awareness. Something out there, far beyond, had noticed our presence. And now, it knew where to find us. The forest was eerily silent as we emerged from the temple. No birds, no insects. Nothing but the echo of the machine's hum resonating in my bones, even as I stepped out into the stifling jungle air. It felt like the weight of the entire cosmos was pressing down on us, squeezing the life from this place, and we had unwittingly set it in motion. The team was on edge, whispering among themselves, casting nervous glances at each other. Jonah, the young researcher who'd been steady enough on the way here, was pale and sweating, wiping his brow with a shaking hand. He wasn't alone. Each of us looked like we'd seen something we couldn't unsee, because we had. "Everyone, gather up," Landry commanded. "We need to leave now. This site, it's active. Whatever that machine is, it's sentient enough to know we're here, and I don't intend to stick around for its response." His words had barely settled when the first shot rang out, cracking through the thick air. I dropped to the ground instinctively, pressing my face into the damp soil as chaos erupted around me. The local guides bolted into the underbrush, while Landry and a few others dove for cover behind trees and rocks. Another shot, closer this time, and I caught a glimpse of our attackers. They weren't military, but they moved like it. Dark-clad, equipped with high-grade tactical gear that blended seamlessly with the jungle shadows. Mercenaries, likely hired by the same organization funding our expedition, but clearly with a different mission. They'd been waiting, watching, and now they were making their move. One of the mercenaries approached the temple entrance, barking orders in Portuguese. He held some kind of scanner, clearly searching for something. I saw Landry huddled nearby, his face a mask of pure terror, clutching his equipment. "Why are they here?" Jonah whispered, trembling beside me. "Aren't they with us?" I shook my head. "They're here for that machine, and they're not leaving witnesses." The realization hit hard. This was never meant to be a research expedition. We were here to do the dirty work, to activate whatever was down there. Now that we'd done our part, we were expendable. Landry crawled over, his face drenched in sweat. "David, listen to me. We have to get out of here. They'll kill us all if they find us." "How many of them are there?" I asked, eyes darting toward the mercenaries. They moved with precise coordination, sweeping through the area, guns trained on every shadow. "At least 10, maybe more," Landry said. "If we split up, we might have a chance." A chance, right. Not a good one, but a chance. I took a quick inventory of my gear, nothing that would help me in a fight. Just the bare essentials. I gestured to Jonah. "You, stick with me. Landry, take the others and head north. There's a river about a mile that way. You might be able to lose them in the water." He nodded, his eyes haunted but determined. Without another word, he slipped away, leading the rest of the team into the trees. I watched him go, feeling a pang of guilt as I turned to Jonah. "Stay low," I muttered, "and don't make a sound." We slinked through the underbrush, inching our way around the mercenaries, keeping to the thickest parts of the forest. The undergrowth scratched at my skin, leaves damp with mist pressing into my face, but I barely noticed. All that mattered was getting as far away from that temple, and those men, as possible. But it was as though the jungle had conspired against us. Each snap of a twig felt like a gunshot, every rustle a dead giveaway. I could feel the mercenaries closing in, their presence like a shadow behind us. Then Jonah tripped, crashing into a tangle of roots with a yelp. The sound tore through the quiet, and I heard the mercenaries shout to each other, their footsteps closing in. I grabbed Jonah, dragging him to his feet, but it was too late. The first mercenary emerged from the darkness, rifle raised, his eyes cold and unblinking behind a mask. There was no hesitation. He fired. The shot caught Jonah in the leg and he screamed, clutching his thigh as blood poured between his fingers. The mercenary aimed again, and I knew we were out of options. I threw myself at him, tackling him to the ground, the force of impact rattling my bones. He was stronger, better trained, and within seconds he had me pinned. His grip tightened around my throat, cutting off my air, and I felt the edges of my vision start to blur. But as my hand scrabbled across the ground, it closed around a rock. I swung it hard, smashing it against his head. He went limp, collapsing in a heap beside me. I stumbled to my feet, gasping, and grabbed Jonah. "Come on!" I hissed, dragging him into the trees. His breathing was ragged, pain etched into every line of his face, but he managed to stagger along beside me. We kept moving, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter as we plunged deeper into the forest. But the jungle seemed endless, the oppressive heat and the wet decaying smell closing in around us. I could feel the hum of the machine still, as if it were calling me back, drawing me closer to its dark, unknowable purpose. We stopped to catch our breath. Jonah leaned against a tree, pale and sweating, his leg a mess of blood and dirt. I knelt beside him, tearing off a strip of my shirt to bind the wound as best I could. "David, what was that thing, that machine?" I didn't have an answer that would make any sense. Not after what we'd seen. All I knew was that whatever it wasn't meant for us, and we had woken something. "It's a beacon," I said finally. "It's calling something. And I think "I think they're coming." Jonah's face crumpled, a mixture of terror and despair. He closed his eyes, his head slumping back against the tree. I wanted to tell him we'd make it out, that we'd survive this, but I couldn't bring myself to lie. The jungle was quiet again, unnaturally so, as though every creature in it was holding its breath, waiting. Then I heard rhythmic hum, distant but intensifying. It wasn't coming from the direction of the temple, it was coming from above. I looked up and saw a faint light cutting through the dense canopy, aligned with the beat I'd felt in the machine. "Jonah," I whispered, shaking him. "Jonah, look." He opened his eyes, staring up in disbelief as the light intensified, drawing nearer. It was as if the stars themselves were descending, and in that moment I understood. We had sent the signal, and now it was being answered. My mind raced, caught between the urge to run and the dreadful certainty that it wouldn't matter. Whatever was coming, it was beyond us, beyond anything we could hope to escape. I helped Jonah to his feet, his weight heavy against me as we stumbled forward, driven by instinct alone. The light above us became brighter, casting eerie shadows across the forest floor. I didn't dare look back, didn't dare let myself think about what was coming. All I knew was that we had to keep moving, one step after another, into the unknown. We stumbled through the thick underbrush, the twisted roots and vines clutching at our legs, as if the jungle itself were trying to hold us back. Jonah's breath came in ragged gasps, each step a struggle against the weight of his injuries. But with every step, that eerie light grew brighter, casting the jungle in an unnatural icy glow. The hum began to build, a low, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in the marrow of my bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, something immense, vast. I glanced up, barely daring to lift my eyes. A ship, if it could even be called that, stretched across the sky, blotting out the sun. Its surface was a dull, obsidian black, absorbing the light around it. It was so massive that it extended for miles above us, its edges disappearing into the horizon. The sheer size of it felt like an assault on my senses, as if my mind couldn't wrap itself around the idea of something so large hovering above our fragile, finite world. We were ants, trapped beneath the boot of something so vast, so indifferent, that it would crush us without even realizing we were there. The beams began suddenly. A single, blinding column of light descended from the ship's underside, slicing through the treetops with precision. When it struck the ground, the beam spread outward in a widening circle, illuminating a stretch of forest that began to shimmer, almost vibrating, as if caught in a state of suspension. Jonah's fingers dug into my arm, his grip tight with terror as we both stared, paralyzed. Within seconds, the forest floor began to shift. Trees, vines, even the soil itself lifted from the ground, floating up in slow, surreal defiance of gravity. The trees rose intact, roots and all, clumps of earth still dangling from them like strings of hair. Animals scrambled in futile panic, some caught mid-leap, frozen in the beam's unrelenting grip. I could see a jaguar, mouth open in a roar, suspended in the air as if it were a toy lifted by invisible hands. The beam expanded, pulling up everything in its path, a section of rainforest the size of a small city, lifting it effortlessly into the sky. It rose, drifting upward with terrifying gentleness, the way one might carry a delicate sculpture, until it disappeared into the maw of the ship above. And then another beam descended, this one even closer to us. We staggered back, the earth trembling beneath our feet as the beam's light seared the ground just meters away, leaving a scar of empty space where trees and animals had once thrived. The jungle around us was coming undone, piece by piece into the heavens. My mind rebelled against the sight, the logic of it slipping away, leaving only raw, visceral horror. It wasn't war, wasn't conquest. It was collection, careful, methodical, as if Earth was nothing more than a resource being harvested, catalogued for some vast alien purpose. The sky was now a web of descending beams, each one capturing swaths of land and drawing them into the belly of the ship. A beam tore into a distant hillside, lifting entire slabs of rock and dirt with trees and rivers still intact. Farther out, I could make out another beam descending over what must have been a nearby town, plucking buildings and streets from the earth with terrifying precision. People disappearing like ants, sucked into a vacuum. A cold realization settled in my gut, icy and absolute. This was happening everywhere. These beams weren't confined to the Amazon. They were descending across the globe, systematically dismantling our world. "David!" Jonah's voice was a whisper, his face pale, his eyes wide with something beyond fear. "They're taking everything. What are they doing?" "They're harvesting," I managed to choke out. "They're collecting us. The whole damn planet." I felt something breaking inside me. The last shreds of hope unraveling as I watched everything I knew, everything I loved ripped from the earth and drawn into that monstrous vessel. For what purpose? A galactic supply chain? A cosmic zoo? There was no way of knowing, and it didn't matter. Earth had become a product, a resource, fodder for something vast and indifferent. Another beam descended, striking the ground mere feet from where we stood. I felt the pull immediately, a bone-deep tug that dragged at my limbs, my muscles straining as I fought against the force. Jonah was wrenched from my side, his scream lost in the roar of the energy field as he was lifted from the ground, his body twisting and contorting in the light. I tried to reach him, my fingers grasping at empty air as he rose, his terrified face disappearing into the blinding light. I could see his outline, his body silhouetted against the brightness, shrinking into the distance as he was drawn higher, until he vanished into the ship's hold. The pull grew stronger, dragging me to my knees, my hands clawing at the soil as if I could somehow anchor myself. But the earth beneath me was loose, crumbling, and within seconds I was lifted from the ground, the jungle falling away beneath me as the beam pulled me toward the ship. Trees and soil floated around me, suspended in eerie silence as we all rose together, captured by the mechanical precision of the beam. I looked down, catching a final, heart-stopping glimpse of the Amazon, or what was left of it. A scarred, empty landscape, its life stripped bare, nothing but empty ground, where once there had been trees and rivers, animals and people. The beam released me onto a cold, metal surface, my body collapsing in a heap as I struggled to breathe. Around me, fragments of earth lay scattered in grotesque, unnatural arrangements. Pieces of buildings, twisted remnants of trees, bodies frozen in shock. There were other people too, humans from the towns and villages, their faces frozen in expressions of terror, confusion, resignation. They were as trapped as I was, caught in a nightmare beyond anything we could have imagined. I staggered to my feet and looked up, staring into the cavernous hold of the ship. It was vast, stretching endlessly, filled with compartments upon compartments of extracted earth, as though each piece had been catalogued and filed away. This wasn't a fleet of invaders, not a horde of conquerors. This was a harvesting machine, an unfeeling, systematic engine that saw Earth as nothing more than a quarry, a resource to be stripped, sorted, stored. And as I looked around, my mind reeling with the horror of it, a single devastating thought settled into place, a final realization that struck me with a cold clarity. We weren't special. Earth wasn't unique. We were just another planet, another species, catalogued and collected, stored in the vast, indifferent economy of the universe. And as the ship lifted us deeper into the dark, empty void of space, I knew that nothing we did, nothing we ever could have done, would have made any difference. We were already gone.